Greenland looks empty and distant, but powerful countries have never treated it as irrelevant because its location quietly shapes movement across the North Atlantic. For more than a century, Greenland has influenced military planning and global logistics, even while appearing isolated and untouched by world events. Its importance was never about population or culture, but about geography and how distance can either protect or expose entire continents. Greenland sits between North America and Europe in a position where routes converge, making it impossible to ignore during moments of global tension. Long before modern technology, controlling distance meant controlling outcomes, and Greenland shortened that distance in critical ways. As travel expanded across oceans, planners began seeing Greenland as a bridge rather than a barrier between major powers. This made the island valuable even when few people lived there and little economic activity existed on its surface. In the early 20th century, the United States began focusing on Greenland not for ownership, but for access and awareness. What mattered was not what Greenland produced, but how it shaped movement through air and sea. Aircraft crossing the Atlantic naturally passed near Greenland, making it central to long-range travel and monitoring. During periods of conflict, the ability to detect movement early became more important than controlling territory directly. Greenland offered a way to observe and respond faster without needing permanent expansion elsewhere. This transformed the island into a strategic position rather than a political objective. Even when attention shifted, the underlying logic remained because geography does not change with headlines. Greenland stayed important simply by remaining where it is. American interest in Greenland shifted from theory to practice when global conflict made geography immediately relevant rather than abstract. As air travel improved, crossing the Atlantic required reliable stop points, and Greenland naturally fit into those emerging routes. Aircraft could not yet fly long distances without refueling, making midpoints across the ocean strategically valuable. Greenland provided a location where planes could land, refuel, and continue journeys between continents safely. This practical value turned the island from a map curiosity into a logistical necessity. During wartime planning, speed and reliability mattered more than political ownership or long-term settlement. Greenland allowed movement across the Atlantic to become predictable instead of uncertain. Weather monitoring also became critical, as storms forming near Greenland affected routes across Europe and North America. Accurate forecasts improved safety and planning, making observation stations increasingly valuable. Greenland's position allowed early detection of changes moving across the North Atlantic region. This reduced uncertainty for shipping and aviation at a time when delays carried serious consequences. The United States did not need to control Greenland politically to benefit from its position. Presence and cooperation provided enough access to reduce strategic risk. Over time, temporary arrangements became normalized as their usefulness proved consistent. What began as logistical support slowly became part of long-term planning. Greenland was no longer distant when global systems depended on predictable movement through its space. The Second World War turned Greenland from a useful location into a critical piece of Atlantic strategy almost overnight. As conflict expanded, controlling air and sea routes became essential for survival rather than convenience. Greenland's position allowed aircraft to move safely between North America and Europe when other routes were too risky. This reduced travel time and increased reliability during moments when speed mattered more than secrecy. Weather stations on Greenland became vital for forecasting conditions across the North Atlantic. Accurate weather data helped protect ships and aircraft from storms that could destroy missions before they began. These stations quietly improved coordination across vast distances during the most demanding years of the war. Greenland also allowed early detection of movement across the Arctic and North Atlantic regions. This created an informational advantage without requiring large populations or permanent settlement. The United States began treating Greenland as part of a broader defensive system rather than a distant outpost. Cooperation ensured access while avoiding the complications of direct political control. By the end of the war, Greenland was no longer optional in strategic planning. It had proven its value under pressure, not in theory but in practice. That experience permanently changed how American planners viewed the island. When the Second World War ended, Greenland did not lose importance, because global rivalry continued and security planning shifted from battles to long-term positioning. Military planners began focusing on early warning, reaction time, and distance rather than occupation, making geography more important than borders. Greenland's position placed it directly between North America and routes crossing the Arctic, where aircraft and later missiles could travel fastest. As technology advanced, northern paths became the shortest and most efficient routes, increasing Greenland's strategic relevance without public attention. Early detection systems became essential, and Greenland offered space for radar installations far from cities or civilian infrastructure. These systems extended visibility across vast areas, allowing monitoring that could not be achieved from continental locations alone. Greenland became part of a defensive network designed to buy time, not to project force or control territory directly. Its role was quiet, but critical, focused on awareness, monitoring, and reducing uncertainty during tense periods. Strategic value came from function rather than population, industry, or political visibility. Greenland mattered because it helped prevent surprise, even when the world appeared calm on the surface. American interest in Greenland did not fade after the war, because its strategic value was tied to geography, not to a single conflict or era. As global systems expanded, the importance of controlling routes, visibility, and response time became permanent rather than temporary concerns. Greenland continued to sit at the center of northern air and sea paths, connecting North America with Europe and the Arctic region. This meant ignoring Greenland would create blind spots in monitoring movement across vast and sensitive areas. Military planning increasingly relied on continuity, not emergency measures, keeping Greenland relevant even during calmer periods. Infrastructure built earlier was maintained because replacing its function elsewhere was costly and inefficient. Greenland allowed extended awareness without requiring large populations, industrial centers, or visible expansion. This made it uniquely suited for long-term strategic presence rather than short-term occupation. Over time, planners viewed Greenland as a fixed part of the security landscape, not an optional asset. Its importance remained steady because geography did not change, even as technology and politics evolved. Greenland stayed valuable by quietly doing its job, not by attracting attention or controversy. Over time, Greenland's importance extended far beyond military defense, because its location supported weather forecasting, aviation safety, and long-distance logistics across the North Atlantic. Accurate weather data collected in Greenland helped predict storms that affected flights and shipping routes between North America and Europe, reducing uncertainty in global movement. Scientific stations allowed long-term observation of Arctic conditions, quietly supporting navigation, mapping, and planning for systems that depended on reliable northern routes. Greenland also provided isolation and stability for infrastructure that required minimal interference while remaining close enough to major global corridors. This combination made Greenland useful, not for one purpose, but for many overlapping systems that valued reliability more than visibility. As technology advanced, these systems layered on top of each other, increasing Greenland's relevance without requiring political control or large populations. Its importance grew gradually because each new use reinforced existing ones instead of replacing them. Greenland mattered because it supported how the modern world moved, observed, and planned across vast distances. As attention to Greenland continued, interest slowly expanded beyond location toward what existed beneath the ice and surrounding seas. Greenland was not rich in easy resources, but it contained materials that could matter in the future under the right conditions. Rare minerals, energy potential, and fishing access were not immediately decisive, but they added long-term economic relevance. What made these resources important was not current extraction, but the possibility of access if conditions changed. Strategic planning often considers what may become valuable, not only what is valuable today. Greenland offered options rather than guarantees, which mattered in long-term calculations. As technology improved, reaching difficult environments became more realistic and less theoretical. Resources reinforced Greenland's value by adding economic weight to an already strategic location. The island became important not because it promised wealth, but because it removed uncertainty about future access. This combination of location and potential kept interest alive across decades. As global attention slowly shifted northward, the Arctic stopped being viewed as a frozen barrier and began to be seen as an emerging zone of movement. Melting ice did not suddenly transform Greenland, but it changed how planners evaluated distance, access, and long-term positioning. Routes that were once theoretical started to appear on strategic maps as possible future corridors. Greenland sat directly beside these changing paths, reinforcing its relevance without requiring immediate development. Interest was not driven by urgency, but by preparation for conditions that might define future decades. Strategic thinking often focuses on reducing uncertainty before it becomes a problem. Greenland offered a way to observe and adapt to Arctic change without committing to dramatic action. Its value increased because it allowed presence near transformation, not because it promised instant benefit. Climate research, navigation studies, and infrastructure planning all overlapped in Greenland's geographic space. This layering of roles made Greenland harder to ignore, even when public attention moved elsewhere. The island remained useful because it connected long-term trends with practical positioning. Greenland's importance grew quietly, shaped by anticipation rather than reaction. From the outside, American attention toward Greenland often looked temporary, but in reality it was built into long-term strategic thinking. Greenland's value was tied to permanent geographic realities that did not change with political cycles, wars, or shifting public priorities. As long as global movement depended on northern routes, Greenland remained relevant regardless of headlines. Strategic planning is rarely about immediate needs alone and often focuses on maintaining options decades into the future. Greenland consistently offered those options by reducing uncertainty in regions where distance and visibility mattered most. This made interest persistent, even during periods when the island seemed absent from public discussion. Planners understood that ignoring Greenland would mean surrendering awareness over critical northern approaches. That risk was unacceptable, even in calmer eras, because geography does not pause when attention fades. Over time, Greenland became a constant reference point, rather than a debated objective. Its importance was assumed, not argued, because experience had already proven its value repeatedly. This quiet consistency explains why Greenland never disappeared from long-term strategic calculations. Interest endured not because of urgency, but because it never needed to be rediscovered. American strategy toward Greenland was never centered on ownership, because effective control does not always require legal possession. What mattered was access, presence, and the ability to operate when conditions demanded quick decisions. Greenland allowed these advantages without the political cost or responsibility of direct governance. By maintaining agreements and infrastructure, the United States secured practical influence rather than formal authority. This approach reduced friction while preserving strategic benefits across decades. Control through cooperation proved more stable than control through expansion. Greenland became integrated into systems that functioned continuously, not temporarily or symbolically. These systems depended on reliability, shared interests, and geographic necessity rather than declarations of power. Because of this, Greenland's role remained consistent even as global priorities shifted. Ownership was unnecessary when outcomes could be shaped through access and planning. This model allowed long-term presence without provoking resistance or instability. Greenland fit this approach perfectly, offering leverage through location instead of political control. That is why interest persisted quietly without dramatic moves or visible confrontation. For long periods, Greenland seemed absent from public discussion, yet it consistently reappeared whenever global systems expanded and old assumptions about distance stopped working. This repetition was not driven by politics or personalities, but by geography resurfacing when technology made the world feel smaller and more connected. Each time aviation, communication, or monitoring advanced, planners discovered that northern gaps created risks no technology could fully remove. Greenland quietly solved those problems by sitting exactly where awareness, speed, and reach mattered most across the North Atlantic and Arctic regions. When new routes emerged, Greenland reduced uncertainty by offering visibility where alternatives were limited or unreliable. This made the island valuable, not during moments of calm, but when systems became complex enough to fail without warning. Interest in Greenland rarely arrived with dramatic announcements or sudden action, because its role was preventative rather than reactive. Instead, it returned through maintenance of infrastructure, renewed agreements, and quiet updates that rarely reached public attention. These moments reflected preparation, not urgency, showing how strategic thinking often works far ahead of visible consequences. Greenland did not need to be constantly discussed to remain important, because its value was already understood by those planning long-term stability. Each return reinforced the same lesson learned decades earlier, that geography waits patiently while technology and priorities change around it. This is why Greenland kept reappearing in strategic thinking, even when it seemed forgotten by the wider world. As global systems expanded, Greenland stopped being interesting only to the United States and quietly entered the calculations of other major powers. Countries with interests in Arctic routes, long-range aviation, and early warning systems began paying closer attention to northern geography. The Soviet Union, and later Russia, viewed the Arctic as a natural extension of strategic depth rather than a distant frontier. Northern routes offered shorter paths for aircraft, submarines, and communication systems, making Arctic access increasingly relevant. This meant Greenland was no longer just a bridge between continents, but a reference point in a much larger northern equation. As Arctic capabilities grew, competition focused less on ownership and more on presence, access, and awareness. Russia expanded northern infrastructure to support navigation, monitoring, and mobility across Arctic regions. These moves reinforced the idea that the Arctic was not empty space, but a strategic layer above traditional maps. Other countries followed similar logic, increasing research, patrols, and long-term planning tied to northern environments. Greenland sat near the center of these overlapping interests without needing to change its role or appearance. Its value increased not because of sudden action, but because more actors recognized the same geographic realities. The island became part of a shared understanding that northern access shaped future security and movement. This growing attention confirmed what planners had known for decades, that Greenland mattered even when no one spoke about it openly. Interest did not mean confrontation, but awareness that ignoring the North carried long-term risks. Greenland's position ensured it remained relevant whenever global focus shifted toward Arctic systems. As attention expanded northward, it became clear that influence in the Arctic rarely appeared as borders, flags, or public declarations. Real control often took the form of logistics, access agreements, and the ability to operate consistently in difficult environments. Greenland fit this model because presence there shaped movement without requiring visible ownership or confrontation. For the United States, access to Greenland meant stability across air routes, monitoring systems, and long-term planning rather than direct control. This approach reduced political friction while preserving strategic advantages that could be activated when needed. Other powers recognized the same pattern and began focusing on infrastructure instead of symbolism. Russia treated the Arctic as a corridor for mobility and depth, investing in routes that reduced distance across northern regions. These efforts were not about Greenland itself, but about shaping how movement occurred around it. China later approached the Arctic through research, shipping interest, and long-term economic planning rather than immediate presence. This reinforced the idea that Arctic influence was about preparation, not dominance. Greenland remained central because it affected how all these systems intersected without becoming a battleground. Its importance lay in shaping options quietly, long before decisions ever reached public view. The island influenced outcomes by existing at the crossroads of logistics, distance, and predictability. That is why Greenland mattered, even when nothing appeared to be happening. Greenland attracts powerful countries not because it is easy to control, but because its position promises influence while hiding enormous long-term responsibility. On a map, Greenland looks empty, yet in reality it is one of the harshest environments where mistakes become permanent problems instead of temporary setbacks. Any country that considers taking real control quickly faces the same reality. Interest is simple, but managing Greenland is expensive, risky, and unforgiving. Maintaining bases, supply lines, and infrastructure on ice requires constant effort, massive funding, and planning measured in decades, not election cycles. Extreme weather can isolate regions for months, turning logistics into a permanent struggle rather than a solvable engineering task. This creates hesitation even among the most powerful states because Greenland does not reward speed, aggression, or symbolic control. Instead, it demands patience, resilience, and a willingness to absorb losses quietly over long periods of time. That is why Greenland generates fascination and fear at the same time, making everyone want access, but few want ownership. Greenland feels mysterious not because information is hidden, but because much of what matters there lies beneath layers of ice and uncertainty. The island is covered by one of the largest ice sheets on Earth, hiding land, minerals, and geological structures that are difficult to study directly. Scientists know valuable resources exist below, but reaching them requires technology, stability, and patience few countries are ready to commit. Unlike other regions, Greenland does not allow quick extraction or rapid profit, turning opportunity into a long-term gamble. Melting ice does not suddenly reveal wealth, it creates new risks that must be managed before anything can be gained. This uncertainty makes Greenland feel like a promise that cannot be rushed without serious consequences. The island offers potential, but only to those willing to wait, invest, and accept years of unpredictability. That balance between promise and risk keeps Greenland surrounded by speculation, but rarely decisive action. Greenland matters because it sits at the intersection of geography, uncertainty, and long-term power, where location shapes outcomes more than force or ambition. It connects continents, shortens distances, and provides visibility across regions where reaction time can decide everything before conflict even begins. Unlike places that promise quick rewards, Greenland offers something rarer: control over space, awareness, and future options rather than immediate profit. That is why powerful countries want access to Greenland without owning it, influence without responsibility, and presence without permanent commitment. Taking Greenland would mean accepting decades of cost, risk, and responsibility in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Wanting Greenland is easy, but managing it requires patience, resources, and tolerance for uncertainty that few systems can sustain. In the end, Greenland reveals a deeper truth about power. The most important places are often the ones no one rushes to take. They are watched, prepared for, and quietly respected because mistakes there cannot be undone.